$1 billion. That was the estimated value of the empire: the record label, the liquor brand, the clothing line, the television network, built over 3 decades from a single music industry internship into one of the most recognizable brands in American entertainment. Then, in September 2024, federal agents walked into a Manhattan penthouse and arrested the man at the center of it all. The indictment ran to 14 counts. The charges included racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution. How does a billion-dollar empire become the subject of a federal racketeering case, and what exactly was it built on? That is what this episode examines. Sean Combs did not inherit his position in the music industry. He earned entry to it. In the early 1990s, he worked as an unpaid intern at Uptown Records in New York City, absorbing the mechanics of artist development, radio promotion, and commercial positioning. He was eventually hired as a talent director. He was eventually fired. That sequence, entry, acceleration, rupture, would define the rhythm of his entire career. In 1993, he founded Bad Boy Entertainment. The label's early roster included artists who would reshape the commercial landscape of hip-hop and R&B. The notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, Total, 1112. It was a cultural institution. Albums released under its imprint moved millions of units. The label's sonic aesthetic, orchestral samples, glossy production, crossover accessibility made it a dominant force on the Billboard charts and on radio formats that had previously been resistant to hip-hop. Combs himself became a performer, releasing his debut album under the name Puff Daddy in 1997. The record sold over 6 million copies in the United States alone, according to RIAA certification data. He won Grammy Awards. He appeared on magazine covers. He became, in the language of the entertainment industry, a boom. Sean John, his clothing line, launched in 1998, generated revenues that Forbes later estimated at over $100 million annually at its peak. The line won a Council of Fashion Designers of America award in 2004. Combs expanded into fragrance, into television production, into a cable network. Revolt TV launched in 2013 with distribution agreements covering tens of millions of households. Each venture was positioned not as a side project, but as a pillar of a diversified media and lifestyle company. The liquor partnership was perhaps the most lucrative single asset. His involvement with Ciroc Vodka, structured as a profit-sharing arrangement with Diageo beginning in 2007, reportedly generated tens of millions of dollars in annual distributions as the brand's sales volume grew significantly under his marketing influence. Forbes placed him on its Celebrity 100 list repeatedly. In 2022, the magazine estimated his net worth at approximately $1 billion. He was, by any conventional financial metric, a success story of historic proportions. The narrative was coherent. The numbers were real. The question that prosecutors would later ask and answer was what else was real. The first major legal rupture arrived not from a federal grand jury but from a civil filing. In November 2023, Cassie Ventura, the recording artist who had been signed to Bad Boy Entertainment and who had been in a personal relationship with Combs, filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The complaint alleged rape, sex trafficking, and years of physical abuse. The specific allegations were detailed and extensive. They described a pattern of coercive control, physical violence, and what the filing characterized as forced participation in organized sexual encounters that the lawsuit termed freak-offs. Combs denied the allegation. The lawsuit settled the following day, within 24 hours of filing, for an undisclosed sum, according to statements from both parties' legal representatives. The speed of that settlement drew immediate and sustained attention from legal analysts and journalists. But here is what no one saw coming. The Ventura lawsuit did not close the case, it opened it. Within weeks, additional civil lawsuits were filed by other plaintiffs making allegations with structural similarities to those in the Ventura complaint. The volume of filings accelerated. By early 2024, the cumulative legal exposure from civil actions alone represented a significant and growing liability. Attorney General Letitia James of New York confirmed in early 2024 that her office was reviewing the allegations. The Department of Homeland Security was also reported to be conducting an investigation, a detail that signaled federal interest extending beyond civil liability. In March 2024, federal agents executed search warrants at 2 properties associated with Combs, a residence in Los Angeles and a property in Miami. The searches were conducted by Homeland Security Investigations. Video footage of the Miami property search, obtained and published by CNN, showed agents in tactical gear moving through the premises. It was a visual rupture. The gap between the penthouse image and the federal search warrant made concrete and visible. Combs traveled to the Caribbean shortly after the searches were executed. His legal team characterized his travel as unrelated to the investigations. Prosecutors would later characterize it differently. The re-engagement question the evidence now forced was this: how long had the people closest to this operation known, and how many of the enterprise's structures had been designed not to generate revenue but to maintain control? Civil attorneys representing multiple plaintiffs alleged in their filings that employees, associates, and in some cases professional service providers had facilitated or failed to report conduct described in the complaints. Those specific allegations against named third parties were contested and remained civil claims at the time of the federal indictment. What was not contested was the scale of the federal response. When Homeland Security executes simultaneous warrants across multiple states, the investigative architecture behind that action is substantial. It does not assemble overnight. According to court filings reviewed by multiple established news organizations, the federal investigation had been underway for a significant period before the search warrants were executed. On September 16, 2024, Sean Combs was arrested at a hotel in Manhattan. The arrest was executed by federal agents. He was transported to the Southern District of New York for processing. The indictment unsealed that day charged him with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud and coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The racketeering charge was the structural centerpiece of the government's case. Under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, prosecutors are required to demonstrate not merely that crimes occurred, but that they occurred as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise with an organization. The indictment alleged that Combs, together with employees and associates, operated such an enterprise over an extended period. The enterprise, prosecutors alleged, used the infrastructure of his legitimate business operations, the label, the management companies, the event production apparatus, as instruments of coercion and control. The specific mechanism described in the indictment centered on what the document called freak-offs, organized sexual performances that the government alleged were not consensual but were produced through a combination of physical force, psychological coercion, financial dependency, and the use of controlled substances. The indictment alleged that employees were directed to procure participants, that the events were sometimes recorded, and that the recordings were used as instruments of leverage. According to the indictment, this pattern of conduct extended across years and across multiple jurisdictions, which is precisely what elevates a criminal case from a state charge to a federal racketeering prosecution. Combs pleaded not guilty to all counts. He was ordered detained pending trial. His legal team argued for bail, proposing a $50 million bond secured by real property. The government opposed release, and the court agreed with the government. citing what the detention order described as a risk of obstruction and a risk of flight. The denial of bail in a case of this profile at that bond level was itself a signal of how seriously the court assessed the government's evidence. And here is what the financial record showed in parallel. The empire was already contracting before the arrest. Revolt TV announced in late 2023 that it was laying off its entire staff as it restructured. The Diageo relationship, which had been the single most lucrative financial partnership in the portfolio, had already ended. Diageo confirmed in 2023 that it had acquired full ownership of the Kerop brand and that the profit-sharing arrangement with Combs had been terminated. The clothing line's retail footprint had diminished significantly from its peak. The assets that had composed the billion-dollar valuation were, by the time of the arrest, worth considerably less. The indictment named no co-defendants in its initial form, but it referenced unnamed co-conspirators in language that signaled the investigation had not concluded. Multiple civil cases remained active in parallel with the criminal proceedings. The legal costs alone: defense counsel for a federal racketeering trial, civil litigation across multiple jurisdictions, asset management during a period of reputational collapse, represented a financial drain of a scale that few private fortunes could sustain indefinitely. As of the time this episode was produced, Sean Combs remained detained at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, awaiting trial in the Southern District of New York. He had pleaded not guilty to all federal charges. The criminal trial had not yet concluded, and the legal presumption of innocence remained in effect. What the record showed, the indictment, the detention order, the civil settlements, the search warrants, was the documented architecture of a federal prosecution of unusual scope. The financial aftermath was already measurable. The Revolt TV layoffs eliminated an organization that had employed a significant number of people in the media industry. The Kerop partnership, which had been structured to provide ongoing income independent of any single project's performance, was gone. The Sean John brand's commercial presence had contracted substantially. The Bad Boy Entertainment catalog retained value. Master recordings do not disappear. But the active business infrastructure around it had largely ceased to function. For the artists, employees, and business partners who had built careers inside the Bad Boy ecosystem, the collapse created a specific and practical problem. Careers had been developed, contracts had been signed, and professional identities had been constructed in relation to an organization that was now the subject of a federal racketeering prosecution. Some of those individuals had no connection to the alleged conduct whatsoever. The disruption to their professional lives was real and documented, and it deserves to be stated plainly. The civil plaintiffs who had filed lawsuits faced a different kind of aftermath. Several cases had settled, others remained active. The legal process for civil plaintiffs in cases involving alleged conduct of this nature is long, expensive, and frequently re-traumatizing. The existence of a parallel federal prosecution can complicate civil proceedings in ways that extend timelines and increase costs. For the individuals who alleged they were harmed, the resolution of the legal cases, whatever form that resolution ultimately takes, is not the end of the consequence they carry. The broader entertainment industry watched the proceedings with an attention that was, in several cases, accompanied by internal reviews. Talent management structures, label contracts, and the informal power relationships that define how careers are made and controlled in the music business were subjected to a degree of scrutiny that the Combs case made unavoidable. The one lesson the record supports, stated plainly, institutional scale and cultural prestige do not constitute oversight. An organization can generate genuine revenue, produce genuine art, and employ genuine talent, and still contain, at its operational core, conduct that no amount of commercial success makes permissible or invisible forever. The federal apparatus that ultimately moved against this enterprise did not act on rumor. It acted on evidence assembled over time across jurisdictions by investigators who follow the documented record to where it led. The billion-dollar valuation. The trial will determine what the record ultimately shows. What it already shows is enough.